Did you know that over 2 million Africans died under French colonial rule alone? This is a story of crimes against humanity on a scale that is hard to comprehend, atrocities committed under the guise of civilization, and a legacy of injustice that continues to haunt the continent today. Welcome to the History, Mystery and Crime channel, and prepare to delve into the dark heart of colonial Africa. The period between the 19th and mid-20th century saw European powers carve up Africa with ruthless efficiency. France, in particular, controlled over 35% of the continent, from the Maghreb to the Congo. But this control came at a devastating cost. The death toll under French colonialism alone is estimated to be over 2 million people. These weren't just battlefield casualties. They were the victims of systematic violence, exploitation, and neglect. And France was far from alone in its brutality. The continent became a laboratory for inhumane policies and practices, all justified by the supposed superiority of the colonizers. Let's start with a massacre largely erased from history, the Tevif massacre in 1888. Tevif, a borderland town in what is now Ghana, was the site of a brutal event that marked a turning point in the transition from pre-colonial to colonial rule in the Gold Coast. British forces, eager to assert their authority, descended upon the town, leaving an estimated 800 people dead. The shocking violence sent waves through the communities of the region, and yet, the Tevif massacre remains conspicuously absent from many historical accounts. Its timing, falling in a liminal period between eras, may explain its erasure. But the silence surrounding it speaks volumes about how colonial powers prefer to bury the evidence of their brutality. Then there's the Herero and Nomor genocide in German Southwest Africa, modern-day Namibia. This was arguably one of the 20th century's first genocides. In January 1904, German colonial leaders in what was then German Southwest Africa sent a telegram to Berlin, claiming a Herero uprising was underway. There was no fighting. The spark was dispute over gold prices and the German demand for Herero confinement to unsuitable reservations. Kaiser Wilhelm II responded by sending Lieutenant General Lothar von Trotha as the new colonial governor. Von Trotha issued the Vernichtungsbefehl, the extermination order. The consequences were catastrophic. The Herero and Nomor people were driven into the desert, where tens of thousands perished from thirst and starvation. Those who survived were forced into concentration camps, where they faced horrific conditions and further violence. The scale of this atrocity is staggering. German Southwest Africa was larger than Britain, France, and Germany combined. The genocide was a deliberate act of racial extermination, a dark chapter in German history that foreshadowed the horrors of the Nazi era. The French were no less ruthless in their pursuit of colonial domination. The Villette-Chenoine mission, launched in January 1899, provides a chilling example. Captains Villette and Chenoine led a column of soldiers eastward, leaving a trail of documented atrocities in their wake. Murder, rape, pillaging, village burning, these were the hallmarks of their campaign. These men already had reputations for brutality earned during the conquest of the Mossi Kingdom in Burkina Faso. The mission was meant to expand French influence, but it did so through terror and violence. Their actions were so extreme that even some within the French colonial administration were appalled, though not enough to stop them. The scale of the slave trade cannot be ignored in any discussion of colonial crimes. Gorée Island in Senegal became a major hub for this horrific trade beginning in 1815. Millions of Africans were uprooted in shackles, torn from their homes and families, and forced into a life of servitude. Hundreds of thousands died during transit, crammed into ships in inhumane conditions. Gorée Island stands as a stark reminder of the brutality of the slave trade and the immense suffering it inflicted on the African people. The transatlantic slave trade has been declared a grievous crime against humanity in world history by a UN resolution led by Ghana. But the legacy of slavery continues to shape the continent today. Beyond these headline atrocities, the colonial powers employed a range of mechanisms to control and oppress the African population. The indigenous system in French colonies is a prime example. This system gave colonial officers the power to arrest and imprison Africans without formal court cases or the right of appeal. It applied to petty infractions, but the definition of what constituted a petty infraction expanded over time, like an accordion, giving colonial officers almost unlimited power. The indigenous system persisted until African resistance and human rights activists forced authorities to restrict it. It represented a fundamental weakness in the colonial state. Harsh punishment was handed out for any perceived challenge to authority. Across the continent, colonial powers relied on executions, floggings, amputations, forced removals, and penal labor to maintain their grip on power. Whipping was the most ubiquitous punishment, though it diminished in records as exposés forced reform, suggesting a systematic underreporting before public pressure. The abuses in the Congo Free State under King Leopold II of Belgium are particularly well documented, including amputations, hostage-taking, and village destruction. In Kenya during the 1950s, the prison system expanded dramatically during the Mau Mau uprising, from around 30 facilities in 1940 to 176 prisons and camps housing over 86,000 prisoners. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a systemic and institutionalized pattern of violence designed to control African populations. Even after German Southwest Africa came under South African administration via a League of Nations provision, the situation hardly improved. In 1948, apartheid became law, and the descendants of Dutch and British colonists implemented a rigid racial segregation system that further oppressed the African population. The legacy of colonial violence is far-reaching. The African Union declared slavery, colonialism, and deportation as crimes against Africans in 2026. The Algiers Declaration in 2025, produced at an international conference on colonial crimes, called on former colonial powers to fully assume their historical responsibilities through public and explicit recognition. Colonial violence was not incidental, but structural and institutionalized. It included extreme, quotidian, and structural forms of violence designed to control African populations. It represented deliberate policy, not isolated incidents. The demographic catastrophe resulting from colonial rule is undeniable. Over 2 million deaths under French rule alone, millions displaced through the slave trade, hundreds of thousands who died in transit, and entire populations confined to unsuitable territories. These numbers represent immense suffering and loss. The fight for justice continues today. The AU Decade of Reparations from 2026 to 2036 was launched following the February 2026 AU Summit in Addis Ababa. Africans are awaiting recognition, reparations, and apologies from former colonial powers. This movement includes African diaspora communities globally. The colonial punishment systems evolved into modern incarceration practices. The land dispossession patterns established during colonialism persist, and the economic structures created by colonial extraction continue affecting African development. Recent international conferences, such as the one in Algiers in 2025, are coordinating an African response. The AU is taking formal legal positions on colonial crimes, and there is growing documentation and academic study of previously suppressed histories. Yet, the path to justice is fraught with challenges. Many massacres remain undocumented or underreported in Western archives. Colonial records were often destroyed or classified. Death tolls vary by source and slave. Trade mortality figures are incomplete due to lost records. Genocide recognition remains contested internationally. Former colonial powers have not formally acknowledged AU declarations, and no binding enforcement mechanism has been established. The debate over the form reparations should take, whether financial, land restitution, or institutional reform, continues. And let's not forget that the Herero case reveals how colonial powers invented pretexts for violence, such as the telegram claiming a Herero uprising before any fighting occurred. This suggests a systematic pattern of manufactured justifications for atrocities. The fight for recognition and justice for the victims of colonial crimes is far from over. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths, acknowledging historical wrongs, and working towards a future where such atrocities are never repeated. What do you think is the most significant barrier to achieving justice for colonial crimes in Africa?